She whispered, "It's been so long," and in that moment, everything I'd been holding back shattered. Some connections can't wait. The first day I moved into my new apartment felt ordinary at first. Boxes lined the narrow hallway, the faint smell of fresh paint still clinging to the walls, and the city humming quietly beyond the windows. But the moment I saw her, everything shifted. She stood in the doorway, keys in hand, a slight arch of her brow as if she were weighing whether I was worthy of the space I was about to inhabit. She was in her early 40s, poised and elegant without seeming rehearsed. Her hair, streaked with subtle silver strands, framed a face that held quiet confidence but didn't hide the softness beneath. There was a vulnerability in the way she smiled, just enough to make me notice it, enough to make my chest tighten slightly. She handed me the keys, and when our fingers brushed, it was a brief, almost accidental contact, but it lingered in my mind far longer than it should have. The warmth of her hand, the softness of her skin, the subtle electricity in that fleeting touch, it was impossible to ignore. I followed her down the hallway as she gave me a quick tour of the apartment, pointing out the quirks of the old building. Every step I took felt amplified by the faint scent of her perfume, a gentle mix of vanilla and lavender, clinging to the air. She paused at a small table near the window, arranging a vase of fresh flowers with deliberate care. I watched, almost hypnotized, as her hands moved, precise and graceful, the sunlight catching the faint gold ring on her finger. Her voice, calm and soft, guided me through the small details of the apartment, where to find the boiler, the quirks of the locks, the way the sunlight hit the living room in the late afternoon. But beneath the casual instruction, there was a rhythm to her speech, a warmth that made me want to linger in the room just a little longer than necessary. By the time she left, I found myself standing alone in the apartment, heart beating faster than I could explain. There was nothing overt, nothing dramatic, but the connection, the subtle pull between us, was undeniable. I questioned whether it was just nerves, or if there was something more, something unspoken passing between us in those brief minutes. A glance, a brush of fingers, the quiet steadiness of her presence, already, she had left a mark I couldn't shake. It was the kind of encounter that didn't scream romance, yet it whispered of possibilities. And somehow, I knew this was only the beginning. The days passed, and our interactions became a quiet rhythm I couldn't quite name. Each morning, I'd catch her arranging the hallway flowers before I stepped out for work. The sunlight fell just right on her hair, catching the faint silver strands and giving her an almost ethereal glow. She noticed me noticing her, though she never said a word, just a small, knowing smile, as if she recognized the curiosity in my eyes. Our conversations were brief at first, practical, about maintenance or keys or the odd creak in the floorboards. But slowly, they became more personal, tinged with a warmth I didn't expect. One evening, she appeared in the kitchen doorway, holding a steaming cup of tea, her eyes soft with an unspoken question. "Long day?" she asked, her voice gentle, carrying a quiet kindness that made the world feel smaller and warmer. As she handed me the cup, our fingers brushed again. This time, it lingered, deliberate yet unassuming. I felt the subtle heat of her palm against mine, the smoothness of her skin, the gentle pressure of her thumb on the back of my hand. It was a fleeting contact, but my chest tightened, and for a moment I was aware of nothing else, the hum of the city outside, the faint scent of her perfume, even the soft ticking of the wall clock seemed amplified. I began noticing details I hadn't before, the way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the way her lips curved slightly when she was thinking, the quiet elegance in her posture even as she moved around the apartment. She had a natural grace, unforced, that contrasted sharply with my own restless energy. I wanted to study her more, to understand the life experience behind the lines on her face, the softness in her eyes, the subtle confidence that made her magnetic without effort. And yet, there was hesitation. A constant, gnawing awareness that the connection stirring between us was delicate, fragile even. I wondered if I was reading too much into ordinary kindness, or if she was feeling the same quiet pull. I caught her gaze lingering just a beat too long when I laughed at a small joke, noticed the slight flush on her cheeks as she handed me tea, and felt the silent tension tighten between us. These small, everyday moments became a secret language, a slow dance of unspoken curiosity and quiet longing. I couldn't predict where it would lead, but the awareness of her presence had begun to shape my days. By the time evening fell, I realized I was waiting for the next brush of her hand, the next fleeting glance, savoring the understated intimacy we shared without ever naming it. The city outside continued its endless hum, but inside that apartment, a quiet tension had begun to bloom, one that neither of us could ignore. One evening, a minor plumbing issue kept me in the apartment later than usual. I was crouched under the sink, fumbling with the stubborn pipes, when she quietly appeared in the doorway. She didn't startle me, her presence felt natural, familiar even, though I had only known her for a handful of days. She leaned lightly against the doorframe, her arms crossed, watching me struggle with an ease that suggested patience and something deeper, quiet concern. "Need a hand?" she asked softly, her voice low, almost a whisper. It wasn't the offer itself that mattered, but the tone, gentle, unhurried, inviting trust. When I glanced up, our eyes met, and I felt the faintest flutter in my chest. The room seemed to shrink, filled only with the soft sound of dripping water, our breathing, and the quiet hum of her presence. She knelt beside me, not too close, but close enough that our knees brushed lightly. The contact was accidental, casual on the surface, but electric underneath. I felt the warmth of her leg against mine, the subtle brush of her hand as she reached for the wrench, and a shiver ran through me, not from the cold, but from the intimacy of the moment. Her eyes held mine, steady and understanding, as if she could see past the awkward fumbling to the part of me that longed for connection, for something real. "I haven't done this in a while," she admitted, her voice dropping, revealing a rare vulnerability. For the first time, she shared a sliver of her life, the quiet loneliness she had felt over the years, the moments she had wished for companionship that was honest and kind. I listened, struck by the balance of strength and fragility in her words. There was no pretense, no attempt to impress, just raw honesty, and somehow it made her more magnetic. I found myself brushing a strand of hair from her face, almost instinctively. The soft sweep of her hair against my fingers, the way she didn't move away, the subtle tilt of her head, it all felt intimate in a way words couldn't capture. There was a magnetic tension, quiet but undeniable, that had begun to weave itself between us, building layer upon layer with each lingering glance and unspoken thought. By the time the pipes were fixed, the moment had passed into something more significant than any task we had completed. We shared a fleeting smile, a silent acknowledgement of the connection growing in the shadows of routine life. The evening ended with no dramatic declarations, yet I knew the dynamic had shifted. Something fragile, yet profoundly compelling, had begun to take root. The city lights outside flickered against the walls, but inside the apartment, our quiet companionship, brimming with subtle vulnerability and unspoken desire, felt like its own universe, waiting to expand. It was one of those evenings where the apartment felt suspended in time. The lights outside had dimmed to a soft glow, and the city's hum was distant, like a lullaby. We sat together on the small living room sofa, a shared silence stretching comfortably between us. The air carried her faint scent, warm vanilla with a hint of lavender, wrapping around me like a soft blanket. My heart was oddly aware of every subtle movement, the way her knee brushed mine when she shifted slightly, the gentle sway of her hair as she tucked it behind her ear. She turned to me, her eyes catching the dim light, revealing a depth I hadn't fully seen before. For a heartbeat, there was nothing but quiet. Then, almost shyly, she whispered, "It's been so long." The words were simple, soft, but they landed like a spark in the middle of a dry forest. My chest tightened, my mind racing to reconcile the unexpected intimacy of the moment with the slow-burning tension that had been building between us. I hesitated, conscious of the age gap, of the boundaries unspoken yet understood. But the weight of her words, the vulnerability and honesty in her voice, demanded an answer. I leaned in slightly, careful to match her softness, and said, "Then don't waste another second." My voice was low, deliberate, as though the words carried all the urgency I felt inside. In that instant, the space between us seemed charged. Her breath brushed my cheek, her shoulder lightly pressed against mine. Our fingers grazed accidentally, lingering longer than accidental could explain. It was electric and terrifying and thrilling all at once. Neither of us moved away, as if acknowledging that the moment itself was precious, fragile, and rare. She looked down briefly, a faint blush spreading across her cheeks, then met my eyes again. There was a silent conversation in that gaze, a mutual recognition of desire, curiosity, and restraint. It wasn't reckless, it was deliberate, measured, the quiet acknowledgement of a connection that neither of us could ignore. The apartment, usually filled with mundane sounds, now felt intimate, insulated from the world outside. Every small detail, the soft hum of the radiator, the distant traffic, the gentle rhythm of our breathing, magnified the weight of the moment. I felt a mixture of exhilaration and trepidation, knowing that nothing would ever be quite the same between us again. The whisper had broken a dam of emotions we hadn't dared voice, transforming our quiet familiarity into something profoundly intimate. And as we sat there, inches apart yet worlds connected, I realized that this slow-burning tension, the restraint, the longing, the subtle desire, was only beginning. The real journey, of discovering one another fully, had just begun. The whisper lingered between us, like a melody that refused to fade. That evening, we found ourselves on the balcony, the city light stretching out like a river of tiny stars below. The cool night air brushed against my skin, carrying the faint scent of rain and the distant hum of traffic. She leaned slightly against the railing, and I instinctively moved closer, though not too close, every step measured, cautious, yet magnetic. For a long moment, we simply watched the city. Her presence was a quiet comfort, a steady anchor in a world that suddenly felt full of possibility. The air between us was taut with unspoken words, the kind that made silence feel alive. Then, almost instinctively, our fingers brushed. The touch was tentative at first, a simple meeting of palms, but it carried a weight neither of us had anticipated. I turned my hand, letting our fingers intertwine gently. The warmth of her skin against mine was grounding, like an unspoken reassurance. Her thumb brushed the back of my hand, slow and deliberate, and a shiver ran through me, not from the cool air, but from the closeness, the intimacy, the quiet acknowledgement of desire that needed no words. She didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned just slightly toward me, her shoulder brushing mine. There was a vulnerability in her gaze, softened by the dim glow of the balcony lights, and I felt the same nervous exhilaration reflected in my own eyes. We didn't speak at first, letting the connection itself carry the conversation. Every small movement, the way her fingers rested in mine, the subtle sway of her posture, the faint rise and fall of her chest, was a language of comfort and longing, of hesitations and courage mingled into one. I realized then how extraordinary it felt to simply hold her hand, to feel the pulse beneath her skin, to share a touch so deliberate yet tender. It was a physical closeness that said more than words ever could, reassurance, curiosity, desire, and trust all rolled into one quiet gesture. Time seemed to slow. The balcony, the city, the world beyond, everything faded except for the heat of her hand in mine and the steady rhythm of our breaths. That single touch, delicate yet electrifying, transformed the space between us. It was no longer just silent glances and subtle curiosity, it was a tangible connection, a bridge from longing to presence. By the end of the evening, we lingered there, fingers entwined, leaning lightly against each other, savoring the intimacy that didn't need words. That first touch wasn't a leap, it was a step, careful and deliberate, towards something deeper. And in that quiet, shared warmth, I understood that the slow-burning tension we had nurtured was evolving into a profound closeness neither of us would ever forget. The balcony had become our quiet sanctuary, a place where words weren't always necessary, yet where the weight of unspoken thoughts hung between us. That evening, we brought a small tray of coffee to the living room, settling into the sofa with the city lights casting a soft glow across her face. The air was warm inside, tinged with the scent of coffee and the subtle trace of her perfume. Every small gesture, the way she cradled her cup, the gentle tilt of her head as she listened, felt loaded with meaning. It started casually, a conversation about mundane things, the weather, a book she had been reading, a fleeting memory of her travels. But gradually, the conversation deepened. She spoke softly of her past, the heartbreaks that had left her cautious, the quiet loneliness she carried even in a crowded room, and the moments she had longed for a connection that was honest and tender. There was a grace in her vulnerability, a strength in admitting fears she hadn't shared with anyone else. I shared pieces of my own life too, hesitations and regrets I usually kept tucked away. As I spoke, I felt her presence pressing close, not intrusive, but reassuring. She brushed a stray strand of hair behind my ear, her fingertips lingering just long enough to send warmth along my skin. Her hand then rested lightly on my forearm, a gentle anchor that made me feel seen, understood, and quietly desired all at once. Each story we exchanged, each laugh or sigh, became a bridge between us. We weren't just two people in the same apartment, we were confidants, companions navigating the delicate territory of trust and emotional intimacy. Every glance carried weight, every pause was a shared heartbeat. I noticed the slight tremor in her hands as she laughed, the way her eyes softened when she spoke of something painful, the subtle tension in her shoulders easing as she leaned slightly toward me. There was no rush, no expectation. Only presence, only the comfort of shared vulnerability. In those quiet moments, our connection deepened beyond attraction or curiosity, it became something rare, a mutual recognition of the need for closeness, understanding, and quiet affection. By the end of the evening, I felt a profound sense of warmth and relief. The barriers we had both carried, the hesitation, the fear of judgment, the age gap, the past disappointments, felt lighter. We had crossed a threshold, not with grand gestures, but with honesty and trust. Our hands found each other again, fingers intertwining naturally, as if to seal the understanding that had quietly formed. In that quiet living room, amidst the glow of city lights and the aroma of coffee, I realized that our slow-burn connection had become more than longing, it had become a shared sanctuary of heart and presence. And in that knowledge, I felt an intimacy deeper than anything I had known before. The evening had a gentle stillness, as if the city itself had slowed to let us exist in our own little world. The apartment was filled with the soft clatter of utensils as we prepared a simple meal together. There was laughter in the air, light and unforced, punctuated by the occasional comment on burnt edges or over-seasoned sauce. Each small interaction carried the weight of all we had shared, the whispered confessions, the tentative touches, the hand-holding that had become second nature. She leaned slightly against me as I stirred the sauce, our shoulders brushing. The warmth of her body against mine was familiar now, comforting and grounding. When I offered her a taste, our fingers met again, lightly, almost shyly, but with the ease of intimacy that had grown between us. I noticed the way her eyes sparkled in the soft kitchen light, how the corners of her mouth lifted not just in amusement, but in genuine contentment. We moved to the small living room afterward, plates in hand, and settled close together on the sofa. She rested her head on my shoulder, and I felt the steady rhythm of her breath. My hand found hers again, fingers intertwining naturally, no hesitation, no unspoken question, just presence. The city outside continued its hum, distant and irrelevant, while inside, the apartment felt warm, private, a space carved out solely for us. There were no dramatic declarations, no rushed confessions. Instead, there were soft smiles, gentle touches, whispered jokes, and quiet looks that said everything words could not. When she brushed a stray strand of hair from my forehead, the action was intimate yet tender, a gesture that communicated trust, comfort, and quiet affection. The lingering closeness between us was electric but safe, the culmination of weeks of restrained longing and emotional discovery. I realized that the age gap, which had once seemed like a barrier, now felt like a bridge, an accumulation of life experience, patience, and quiet wisdom that complemented my own curiosity and youthful fervor. The slow-burn connection we had nurtured had blossomed into a relationship built on mutual respect, emotional depth, and gentle, meaningful affection. As we sat there, sharing the warmth of the sofa and the quiet intimacy of being together, I understood that this subtle, tender closeness, was far more powerful than any grand romantic gesture. Our journey had been gradual, careful, deliberate, and it had led to something lasting, a partnership rooted in trust, desire, and the shared understanding that we had finally found a place where we belonged. And in that moment, with her hand in mine and her head resting lightly against my shoulder, I felt a contentment so profound that it didn't need to be spoken. The slow burn romance had reached its gentle, satisfying resolution, quiet, tender, and utterly human. If this slow burn romance captured your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss a story that makes your heart race and your soul smile. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever felt a connection like this?